Hello and welcome, dear listener, to this calming journey through history. Whether you're winding down for the night or simply seeking a little escape, I'm glad you've chosen to join me. Before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from and what time of day it is for you. It's our way of saying hello in this community of nocturnal historians. And if you enjoy this kind of soft, immersive storytelling, I invite you to subscribe so you can drift off to more soothing tales from the past. Now make yourself comfortable, take a deep breath, and let your mind wander with me back in time across the mists of centuries to the world of the Vikings. What comes to mind when you picture these legendary seafarers? Perhaps it's the sight of dragon-prowed ships slicing through icy northern waves, or the clash of swords and shields on the battlefield. But tonight, we'll be exploring a quieter side of Viking society, one that is often overlooked but no less essential, the realm of Viking women. To truly understand the lives of these remarkable women, we must first immerse ourselves in their world. So come with me now to a small Viking settlement somewhere along the wind-swept coasts of Scandinavia. The year is 834A. It's a crisp autumn day, and the birch and ash trees are ablaze with colour against a steel grey sky. Woods smoke curls from the carved dragon-head peaks of the long houses. A dog barks, geese honk, and children's laughter echoes across the hills. At first glance, it looks like any other Viking town, with men busying themselves around the harbour and pastures. But look closer and you'll see that women are the lifeblood, flowing through every aspect of this community. Over by the docks, a woman haggles skillfully with merchants, securing a good price for her husband's latest catch of codfish. In a sunny meadow, a mother patiently shows her daughter how to pluck herbs for healing salves. The ringing of a blacksmith's hammer draws your eye to the forge, where you're surprised to see a woman's strong hands expertly shaping glowing iron. And there, passing under the carved lintel of the grandest long house, is a lady of high status, with keys jingling importantly at her belt and servants scurrying in her wake. Everywhere you look, Viking women are working with tireless competence, cutting up meat for the winter stores, stitching sails for the long ships, and combing wool for warm cloaks. It's clear that without their labour and wisdom, this settlement would swiftly collapse. But as essential as they are, much of what these women do goes unsung. Their daily acts of skill and strength aren't the stuff of epic sagas or boastful poetry. No, their heroism is quieter, but all the more potent for its constancy. With every well-run household and well-raised child, they are literally shaping the future of their people. So in the tales that follow, we will attempt to give voice to the often overlooked women of the Viking age, to illuminate the texture of their days and the fabric of their thoughts. We'll learn how they lived and loved, struggled and triumphed, how they navigated the tides of a changing world with courage, resilience and grace. But before we dive deeper into the details of their lives, let's first take a moment to examine the world into which these women were born, the stage on which their stories played out. Viking society was a fiercely hierarchical one, with clearly defined gender roles and expectations. At the top of the social ladder was the king, followed by the jarls or nobles, who served as his regional administrators. Beneath them were the carls, the free men who made up the bulk of Viking society. They were farmers, craftsmen, merchants, and warriors. At the very bottom were the thechars or slaves, who had few rights and could be bought and sold like livestock. Within this structure, a person's worth and status was determined largely by the reputation and wealth of their family. And for women, their position was inextricably tied to the men in their lives, fathers, husbands, brothers, and sons. In general, women were subordinate to male authority. They could not represent themselves in legal proceedings, for example, but had to be represented by a male relative. The word of a woman was weighted less than a man's. But compared to other parts of medieval Europe, Viking women had some surprising freedoms and avenues to power. Marriages were more often than not arranged for political or economic advantage. But a Viking woman had the right to refuse a suitor if she found him repulsive. She was also in charge of the keys to the household, a potent symbol of her responsibility for its smooth running and supplies. Most notably, a Viking woman had the right to divorce her husband if he severely mistreated her or failed to adequately provide for the family. She was entitled to take back her dowie as well as a portion of their shared property. These legal protections paint a picture of women as valued partners with rights, if not always, social equals. And while it was rare for women to be warriors, they were far from passive spectators in the clashes and conquests of the Viking Age. We find tantalizing clues in burial sites across the Viking world of women who lived bold and unconventional lives. Take the famous Osberg ship burial, unearthed in Norway in 1904. Entombed within a sleek, elegant, long ship were the bodies of two women surrounded by all the trappings of a lavish, aristocratic lifestyle, gilded chests, imported silks, sleds, and an ornate cart. But also interred with these ladies were sacrificed oxmen, dogs and horses, animals associated with battle, speed, and power. Whoever these women were in life, they were honored in death as figures of consequence. Ones who, perhaps, pushed the boundaries of what a woman could be and do in the Viking world. It's within these glimmers and shadows left to us from across the centuries that the true stories of Viking women come alive. Tales of adventure, ambition, hardship, and heart. And in the flickering firelight of this imagined settlement, you can almost see them move, striding in the footprints of their chores, whispering their hopes to giggling friends, gazing out across an amethyst sea with eyes that dreamed of distant shores. So get cozy, dear listener, and let us follow in those footsteps a while. Step with me into the world of Viking women and discover lives as intricate and powerful as the knotwork embroidery they stitched. As we've seen, Viking women were not just passive observers, but active participants in their society. They managed households, engaged in trade and commerce, preserved cultural traditions, and in some cases even fought alongside men in battle. But perhaps one of the most fascinating aspects of Viking women's lives was their role in religious and spiritual matters. In the pre-Christian Norse religion, women played important roles as priestesses, seers, and spiritual leaders. They presided over religious ceremonies, divined the future, and communicated with the gods and goddesses. One of the most prominent female deities was Freya, the goddess of love, fertility, and war. She was said to ride a chariot pulled by cats and to possess a magical cloak of falcon feathers that allowed her to fly. Freya was also associated with the practice of Sida, a form of magic that involved trance-like states and communication with the spirit world. Many Viking women were skilled practitioners of Sida, using it for purposes like divination, healing, and cursing enemies. Other important female figures in Norse mythology included the Norns, who were believed to control the fates of both gods and humans. These three women, Vandi, and Sku sat at the base of the world tree Yggdrasil, weaving the tapestry of fate. They determined the destiny of every person at the moment of their birth, deciding how long they would live and what kind of life they would have. Viking women also played key roles in the cultural transmission of these myths and beliefs. As the primary caretakers and educators of children, they passed down the oral folklore, music, and poetry that formed the backbone of Norse culture. Many of the anonymous works that survive in collections like the Poetic Edda, which contains tales of gods, heroes, and mythical beings, may have been originally composed by women. One such tale is the story of Sigurd, the dragon slayer, and his ill-fated love for the shield maiden, Brynhild. According to the legend, Brynhild was a fierce warrior who had displeased Odin by defying his orders. As punishment, he cursed her to live as a mortal woman, imprisoning her in a remote castle surrounded by a wall of shields and flames until a man brave enough to rescue her arrived. That man was Sigurd, who rode through the flames on his loyal horse and awakened Brynhild from her enchanted sleep. The two fell in love and pledged to marry. But their happiness was not to last. Through a complicated web of curses, betrayals, and magical deceptions, Sigurd ended up marrying another woman, Gudrun, while Brynhild was forced to wed Gud's brother. Consumed by jealousy and regret, Brynhild ultimately engineered Sigurd's murder and then took her own life, throwing herself onto his funeral pyre so that they could be together in death as they could not be in life. Gud, meanwhile, endured even more tragedy and hardship, but emerged as one of the most powerful and influential women in Norse legend through her clever maneuverings and indomitable spirit. Stories like these not only entertained Viking audiences, but also conveyed important cultural values and lessons. The complicated female characters, while not always admirable by modern standards, embodied the Norse ideals of courage, cleverness, honor, and resilience in the face of hardship. By preserving and transmitting these tales, Viking women played a vital role in shaping the worldview and identity of their society. Of course, the world of Norse myth and legend did not always align neatly with the realities of everyday life of Viking women, but in many cases the line between the mundane and the magical was blurred. The spiritual power and wisdom that women wielded in stories was reflected in real-life practices like Norserary rites. At burial sites across the Viking world, women were often laid to rest with objects that symbolized their roles and status in life. A woman of high rank, for example, might be buried with fine jewelry, embroidered clothing, and costly imported goods to signal her wealth and social position. She might also be accompanied by tools of her trade like weaving tablets and spindles, cooking and brewing implements, or herbs and healing supplies, depending on her areas of expertise. Some female graves also contained more enigmatic items that hinted at the deceased's spiritual power and responsibilities. At Fioat in Denmark, a woman was buried with an iron staff, thought to be a sorceress's wand used for directing spiritual energy during rituals. Unusual animal remains like cats or ravens in women's graves are interpreted as familiars that might aid them in magical workings. One of the most spectacular examples of such a burial is the Osberg ship grave, discovered in Norway in 1904. Dated to around 834 CE, the grave contained the remains of two women laid to rest in an elaborately carved Viking longship, along with a treasure trove of grave goods, buried with rich textiles, sleighs, carved furniture, and a complete ox head. The women are thought to have been a queen and her attendant, or relative, but along with the luxurious trappings of wealth and status, the Osberg burial also included more unusual items that suggest the women may have held religious roles. The grave contained wooden staffs, possibly used for ritual purposes, rattles, and a cache of cannabis seeds, which some scholars believe may have been used to induce altered states for magical or shamanic practices. Were these women priestesses, seers, or sorceresses, as well as members of the social elite? While we may never know for certain, the lavishness of their burial and the esoteric nature of some of their grave goods hints at the complex interplay of gender, power, spirituality, and status in Viking Age society. Far from being passive victims of a patriarchal culture, at least some Viking women attained great wealth, influence, and respect, even if the means by which they wielded power might look very different than a male warrior or chieftain. As Christianity spread throughout the Viking world in the 10th and 11th centuries, the role of women in Norse spiritual life began to shift. While the old gods and goddesses did not disappear overnight, their worship was gradually displaced by the new religion. Some Viking women embraced the change, seeing in Christianity a path to greater power and influence. One such woman was Gudrid Thorbana, born in Iceland around 980 CE. A true woman of the Viking Age, Gudrid's life was shaped by the voyages, settlements, and conflicts that defined her era. She was married 3 times, widowed twice, and travelled farther across the Viking world than almost any other woman of her time. Gudrid first arrived in Greenland as a young woman, accompanying her father, who had decided to join the colony established there by Eric the Red. She soon caught the eye of a prominent explorer named Thorstein Eriksson, and the two were married, but their happiness was short-lived. Thorstein died of disease just a few months later, leaving Gudrid a young widow in a harsh and unforgiving land. Undaunted, Gudrid embarked on a series of adventures that would take her from Greenland to the shores of North America and back again. She married Thorstein's brother, Leif Erikson, the famed explorer credited with establishing the short-lived Viking settlement at Lono Meadows in New Finland. Some accounts even suggest that Gudrid herself gave birth to a son, Snorri, at the North American settlement, which would make him the first European child born in the New World. Throughout her travels, Gudrid displayed a remarkable openness to new experiences and ideas. She was among the first Greenlanders to convert to Christianity. And later in life, she made a pilgrimage to Rome, a journey that would have been extraordinarily difficult and dangerous for a Viking Age woman. Her adopted faith clearly gave her both comfort and a sense of purpose in the face of repeated hardships and losses. After returning from Rome, Gudrid became an anchoress living in a small enclosure attached to a church in Iceland. There she spent her final years in quiet contemplation and prayer, revered by her community as a wise woman and a living saint. Her remarkable life story, preserved in the Icelandic sagas, embodies the challenges and opportunities that Viking Age women faced, and the ways in which they met those challenges with resilience, adaptability, and grace. Gudrid's life also highlights the ways in which the spread of Christianity gradually altered the religious and social landscape of the Viking world as the old gods were forgotten and pagan rituals fell out of practice. Women's roles as spiritual leaders and practitioners of magic waned. At the same time, the Church offered new avenues for women to wield influence and authority as abuses, anchoresses, and saints. One symbol of this religious transformation is a small silver crucifix found in a 10th century female grave at the Viking settlement of Birka in Sweden. The woman, buried in a chamber at the heart of the town, was laid to rest with an array of high-status goods, including jewelry, imported vessels, and a set of gaming pieces, markers of her wealth and social position. But around her neck was a small cross, delicately crafted from silver and adorned with gold and colourful enamel work. This poignant artifact, a Christian cross, worn by a Viking woman and buried with her in the old pagan style, embodies the complex and dynamic world that she inhabited. A world where the old ways and the new coexisted, where traditional gender roles were both reinforced and subverted, and where women navigated a shifting landscape of power, belief, and identity. As we come to the end of our journey through the lives of Viking Age women, it's worth reflecting on the enduring legacy of these remarkable individuals. Though they lived in a time far removed from our own, the challenges they faced, childbirth and childcare, household management and economic production, love and loss, faith and doubt, are in many ways timeless. Their stories of resilience, adaptation, and quiet strength in the face of adversity continue to resonate across the centuries. At the same time, the Viking women we've encountered also challenge and expand our understanding of what life was like in the medieval North. They were not simply passive victims of a patriarchal society, but active agents who shaped their own lives and their communities in ways both large and small. From the sagas to the archaeological record, we find evidence of women who were farmers and entrepreneurs, explorers and settlers, warriors and mystics, mothers and leaders. As we've seen, their stories are often hidden between the lines of texts written by men and filtered through centuries of evolving gender norms and expectations. But by reading those texts with fresh eyes, asking new questions, and integrating insights from archaeology, art, and material culture, scholars are slowly but surely recovering a more nuanced and complex picture of Viking womanhood. In the end, perhaps one of the most important lessons we can take from these women's lives is a reminder of the common humanity that binds us across time and space. Though separated from us by a vast gulf of language, culture, and belief, the Viking women we've met were not so different from women today, striving to make a good life for themselves and their families, to find meaning and purpose in a world full of challenges and change, to leave their mark on history in ways both great and small. As we drift off to sleep, buoyed by their stories, we might imagine ourselves back in that long house where we began, the fire burning low, the soft sounds of women's voices and work filling the air. We might picture ourselves as one of those women rising to face another day, tending to children and cattle, stitching a sail or stirring a pot, spinning wool or whispering a prayer. We might feel the weight of our keys at our belt, the warmth of our loved ones at our side, the quiet pride and power of a life well lived, no matter how unrecorded or unremarked by history. And as we slip into dreams, we might carry with us a renewed sense of connection to the women who came before us. Not just the Vikings, but all the generations of mothers and daughters, sisters and wives who have shaped our world in ways we're only beginning to understand. Their legacy lives on in us in the work we do and the stories we tell, in the way we face our own challenges with grace and grit. May we honor them by remembering and by carrying their light forward into whatever new dawns await. As the sun set over the fjord, Gudrid Thorbanna Doya watched her young son, Snorri, play along the rocky shore. The waves lapped gently at his feet as he chased a gull, his laughter echoing off the cliffs. Gudrid smiled to herself, remembering the many shores she had stood upon in her life, the black sands of Iceland, the icy coasts of Greenland, and even so briefly the rich forests of Vinland, far to the west. Gudrid was born around the year 980 in the Icelandic colony her family had helped establish just a generation before. Even for the daughter of a prosperous farmer, life on this stark and beautiful island was full of hardship. The winters were long and dark, food was often scarce, and the threat of disease or injury was never far away. But Gudrid proved resilient from an early age. She learned all the skills a young Viking woman needed to thrive. How to milk the family's sheep and cattle, churn butter, card wool, and weave the thick fabric needed to keep out the cold. Her father also made sure she could ride a horse and defend herself if needed. For while Iceland had been settled by Norsemen seeking a better life, it was still a wild and often dangerous place. As she grew into womanhood, Gudrid began to feel a restless stirring, a desire to see more of the wide world she heard about in the tales of the old schools. When the dashing explorer Thorfinn Karfanani arrived from Greenland, seeking a wife to join him on his adventures, Gudrid didn't hesitate. Here was her chance to make her mark, to be more than just a farmer's wife, toiling in obscurity at the edge of the known world. In the year 1010, Gudrid and Thorin set sail for Greenland with a group of colonists, their long ship loaded down with supplies and livestock. The voyage was harrowing, with towering waves and bone-chilling cold that seemed to seep into Gudrid's very marrow, but she gritted her teeth and held fast, determined not to show weakness. When they finally arrived at the remote settlement of Bratahalid, Gudrid was shocked by the stark beauty of this new land, with its looming glaciers and eerie twilight that lasted for months. Life in Greenland was even harder than in Iceland. The climate was harsher, the soil more barren, and the sense of isolation profound. But Gudrid threw herself into the work of establishing a new home, helping Thorin build their long house and manage their growing farm. She bore him a son, little Snorri, and marveled at this new love that filled her heart, even as her body ached with exhaustion. But Thorin was a man of ambition, and he soon grew restless. He had heard tales of a lush and fertile land even further west, which some called Vinland. In 1020, he gathered a group of settlers, including Guda and Snorri, and set out in search of this fabled place. The journey was long and arduous, with icebergs looming like ghostly sentinels, and the constant fear of getting lost in the vast, empty sea. When they finally reached the shores of what is now Newfoundland, Gudrid was stunned by the richness of this new land. Lush forests of timber stretched as far as the eye could see. The rivers teemed with fish, and wild grapes grew fat on the vines. Here, it seemed they could build a new life of plenty, far from the hardships of Greenland and Iceland. But the natives of Finland, whom the Norse called Skraelings, soon made it clear they did not welcome these strange newcomers. Tensions quickly escalated, and Gudrid watched in horror as her friend Fredius, the fierce sister of Leif Erikson, mercilessly killed several Skraeling women in a fit of rage. Gudrid tended to their burials, sickened by the violence and filled with foreboding for what was to come. Her fears proved prophetic, as the settlement soon came under attack by the enraged Skraelings. Gudrid helped defend their makeshift palisade, even as arrows rained down around them and their supplies dwindled. In the end, they were forced to abandon this hard-won foothold and flee back to Greenland. Dreams of a better life shattered, but even this defeat could not crush Gudrid's spirit. When Thorin grew frustrated with the hardships of Greenland and decided to return to Iceland, Gudrid went with him, helping to establish a prosperous farm back in the land of her birth. She bore him more children and became a respected figure in the community, known for her wisdom, her courage, and her unshakable faith. For Gudrid had experienced another profound change on her journeys, a spiritual awakening that led her to embrace Christianity. Perhaps it was the influence of the priest who had accompanied them to Finland, or perhaps it was some inner light kindled by the wonders and terrors she had witnessed. But Gudrid became one of the first Icelanders to be baptized, and she helped spread the new faith among her people. In her later years, Gudrid would make one final pilgrimage, a journey to Rome itself, the heart of Christendom. It was a voyage that no Norse woman had ever made before, and Gudrid undertook it with the same fearlessness and curiosity that had driven her throughout her life. She met with bishops and abbots, marveling at the great churches and holy relics, and returned to Iceland filled with awe at the wider world she had glimpsed. Gudrid lived to a ripe old age, a matriarch of a large and prosperous family. But even as her sons and grandsons made their own marks on history, her thoughts often drifted back to those earlier voyages, to the feel of a long ship's deck beneath her feet, and the sight of unknown shores on the horizon. For Gudrid knew that she had been a part of something greater than herself, a movement that had forever expanded the boundaries of the Norse world and the limits of what a woman could achieve. Gudrid's story, pieced together from the Icelandic sagas and tantalizing snippets of archaeological evidence, is a testament to the resilience, adaptability, and sheer grit of Viking women. While the tales of warriors and kings may dominate the popular imagination, it was women like Gudrid who were the true heart of Norse society, the ones who kept the home fires burning, who faced the perils of childbirth and the heartbreak of loss, who ventured into the unknown and carved out new lives in strange lands. In many ways, Gudrid was exceptional, a woman of rare courage and resourcefulness who defied the conventions of her time. But she was also emblematic of the many unsung heroines of the Viking age, the mothers and daughters and sisters who endured unimaginable hardships and shaped history in ways both small and profound. As modern archaeology continues to unearth new evidence of these remarkable women, from the richly adorned Burka warrior to the mysterious Osberg queen, our understanding of the Viking world grows ever more nuanced and complex. We begin to see past the stereotypes of barbarian raiders and wild-haired shield maidens to recognize the vital roles that women played in every aspect of Norse life. In the end, perhaps this is the greatest legacy of the Viking women, not the glittering hordes or the far-flung colonies, but the simple, enduring fact of their existence. Against all odds and expectations, they lived and loved, struggled and triumphed, leaving an indelible mark on the world that echoes down through the centuries. And so, as we drift off to sleep, let us dream of them. The weavers and warriors, the explorers and homemakers, the pagan priestesses and Christian pilgrims, let us honor their memory and marvel at their courage, knowing that we walk in the footsteps of giants, the daughters of Odin and Thor, who once sailed the whale road to the very edge of the world. As we've seen, while Viking women's lives were in many ways defined by domestic and familial duties, there were also remarkable individuals who broke the mold and made their mark on history. One such woman was Sigrid the Haughty, a Swedish queen who lived in the late 10th century. Sigrid was the daughter of a wealthy nobleman and grew up in the lake region of Sweden known as Mälarin. From a young age, she was known for her beauty, intelligence, and strong will. She was married twice, first to Eric the Victorious, the King of Sweden, and then after his death to Svein Forkbeard, the King of Denmark. But Sigrid was no ordinary queen, content to remain in the shadows of her powerful husbands. She was a force to be reckoned with in her own right, and her influence extended far beyond the walls of the royal household. One of the most famous stories about Sigrid concerns a group of would-be suitors who sought her hand in marriage after the death of her first husband. According to the Icelandic historian Snorri Sturluson, Sigrid agreed to meet with these men, but on one condition: that they prove their worth to her. She invited them to a grand feast at her hall, but unbeknownst to the suitors, Sigrid had the doors locked and the hall set on fire. As the story goes, she calmly declared that she wanted to cure these petty kings of their desire to marry her. Only one of the men managed to escape the blaze, a testament to Sigrid's ruthlessness and cunning. Whether this dramatic tale is entirely true or not, it speaks to Sigrid's reputation as a woman who knew her own mind and wasn't afraid to wield power in a world dominated by men. She was known to be a skilled politician and negotiator, forging alliances and brokering deals to further her own interests and those of her kingdom. In fact, it was likely through secret manations that her son from her first marriage, Olaf Kon, became the first Christian king of Sweden by forming ties with the powerful rulers of Norway and Denmark and encouraging the spread of Christianity. Sigrid helped to usher in a new era in Sweden's history. But Sigrid's influence wasn't limited to the realm of politics. She was also a patron of the arts and learning, and her court was a center of culture and scholarship. She commissioned works of literature and poetry and supported the work of craftsmen and artisans. In many ways, Sigrid embodied the ideal of the strong, intelligent, and independent Viking woman. She navigated the complex web of Scandinavian politics with skill and savvy, all while maintaining her own power and agency. And through her patronage and example, she helped to shape the cultural legacy of the Viking Age. As we move on to the final chapter of our journey through the lives of Viking women, it's worth reflecting on the many ways in which these remarkable individuals left their mark on history. From the unnamed women who toiled in the fields and managed their households, to the shield maidens who fought alongside the men, to the queens and noble women who wielded power and influence, Viking women were a diverse and fascinating group. Their stories, as glimpsed through archaeology, literature, and folklore, paint a picture of a society that was in many ways more complex and dynamic than we might imagine. While Viking culture was undeniably patriarchal, women still found ways to assert their agency and shape their own destinies. In recent years, new discoveries and scholarship have helped to deepen our understanding of Viking women's lives. For example, the excavation of a Viking burial site in Birka, Sweden, in 2017 revealed the grave of a female warrior, complete with weapons and gaming pieces. This find challenged long-held assumptions about the role of women in Viking society and sparked new conversations about gender roles and identity. Similarly, Ongoing research into the genetic legacy of the Vikings has shed light on the important role that women played in the Viking diaspora. By studying the DNA of people in areas settled by the Vikings, scientists have been able to trace the movements and contributions of Viking women from the British Isles to Iceland to North America. As we come to the end of our exploration of Viking women's lives, it's clear that there is still much to learn and discover. But one thing is certain, these remarkable women left an indelible mark on history, one that continues to inspire and fascinate us to this day. So the next time you find yourself marveling at the achievements of the Vikings, their daring voyages, their cultural and artistic legacies, their impact on the world stage, remember the women who made it all possible, the wives and mothers, the healers and artisans, the warriors and queens, each one a vital thread in the rich tapestry of Viking history. And as we drift off to sleep, let us dream of those long ago days when Viking women walked the earth, their spirits as fierce and indomitable as the northern seas they called home. May their stories continue to be told and celebrated, a reminder of the power and potential that lies within us all. As we've seen, the Viking world was a complex tapestry, woven from many threads, and women were essential in crafting its intricate patterns. While often overshadowed by the exploits of their male counterparts, these remarkable women left an indelible mark on history through their strength, ingenuity, and quiet perseverance. One such woman was Orid the Deep-Minded, born into Irish royalty around 830 AD. Married off to a Viking king in a politically strategic union, Ord soon found herself widowed with a young son, Thorstein the Red. Undaunted, this tenacious woman took charge of her late husband's holdings in Scotland. She ruled this fledgling Viking colony with wisdom and foresight for decades, earning the loyalty of her followers. But as she grew older and her son fell in battle, Ord began to dream of new horizons. With characteristic determination, she commissioned the construction of a mighty ship, a vessel that would bear her, her family, and a hand-picked group of settlers to the newly discovered land of Iceland. Loading this ship with livestock, tools, and her most precious possessions, including her high seat pillars and the soil from her ancestral lands, Odd set sail on an epic voyage into the unknown. Navigating by the stars and the wisdom passed down through generations, Odd traversed the treacherous waters of the North Atlantic. Through storms and perilous seas, she held steady at the helm, drawing on the strength and courage that had defined her life. And when at last the mist-shrouded peaks of Iceland pierced the horizon, Odd knew she had found her new home. In this stark and unforgiving landscape, Odd and her followers carved out a new life. With her wealth and prestige, she secured vast tracts of the choicest land, auctioning it generously among her kin and loyal retainers. Here, in the valleys warmed by geothermal springs, they built sturdy long houses and raised their livestock, planting the seeds of a colony that would endure for generations. As she settled into this new rhythm of life, Odd's thoughts must have often turned to the world she left behind, the lush green of Ireland, the craggy highlands of Scotland, the bustle of the trading ports where she had once walked. But in the simple joys of a grandchild's smile, in the satisfaction of a rich harvest safely gathered, perhaps she found the true wealth she had sought all along. Orr's story, remarkable as it is, was not unique. Countless Viking women faced similar trials and triumphs, though their names have been lost to the mists of time. They too stood shoulder to shoulder with their men, taming wildlands and raising proud families at the edges of the known world. In the Icelandic sagas, we catch tantalizing glimpses of these women. There is the deep-minded Ul's granddaughter, who fearlessly explored the rugged coasts of Greenland, and Gudrit Torbjana Doatsia, the far-travelled woman who gave birth to the first European child in North America. These women, and so many others, played a vital role in the Viking diaspora, serving as anchors of stability in a tumultuous and ever-changing world. But the Viking woman's influence extended far beyond the domestic sphere. In a society where men were often absent for long stretches, trading or raiding overseas, women frequently took on the mantle of leadership. They managed farms and households, oversaw theirs and freemen, and made vital decisions that affected the whole community. Some, like Old, even ruled in their own right as widows or ases. This power was not just economic, but spiritual too. In the pagan traditions of the Vikings, women often served as conduits to the divine. The Velva or seer was a revered figure, sought out for her prophetic visions and magical abilities. Clad in an enchanted cloak of blue and clutching a staff adorned with brass and gems, she would slip into a trance, communing with the gods and spirits to glimpse the twists of fate. One of the most famous Volva was Torbjorg, whose visit to a Greenland farm in a time of famine was immortalized in the saga of Eric the Red. With her hair shimmering like a glacier in the firelight, Torbjorg cast her runes and chanted her spells, foretelling the end of the famine and the farm's returned to prosperity. Hers was a power both feared and respected, a reminder of the vital role that women played in the spiritual life of the Vikings. But even as Christianity spread through the Viking world, women continued to wield influence in the realm of the sacred. In the early days of the new faith, women were often its most ardent advocates, using their social networks and moral authority to win converts. And in the monasteries that began to dot the Norse landscape, women found new avenues for learning, creativity, and contemplation. Perhaps one of these pious women, fingers stained with ink as she bent over a precious manuscript, paused to reflect on the legacy of her pagan form. Did she see in the Valkyries and Norns of the old tales a whisper of the power that women had always held? Did she in her own way carry forward their tradition of weaving destiny, shaping the future with each carefully chosen word? In truth, the impact of Viking women echoed through the ages in ways both seen and unseen. It lived on in the genes of their descendants, carried to all corners of the globe. It survived in the tales and traditions passed down from mother to daughter, in the quiet strength and resilience that saw their families through times of hardship and uncertainty. And it endured in the very fabric of the societies they helped build, in the laws and customs that granted women rights and protections, in the arts and crafts that bore the stamp of their creativity, in the stories and songs that celebrated their courage and accomplishments. So perhaps as we drift off to sleep, we can spare a thought for these remarkable women, the shield maidens and seeresses, the farmers and weavers, the explorers and settlers who helped shape the Viking world. In our dreams, may we walk alongside them for a time, marveling at their fortitude and grace. And may we carry with us a piece of their spirit, that fierce and unshakable spark that still burns, an eternal flame against the darkness of history. As we've seen, the lives of Viking women were deeply intertwined with the rhythms of the natural world. The turning of the seasons dictated the daily round of chores on a Viking farmstead, and perhaps no time of year was more crucial or demanding than the autumn. As the days grew shorter and colder, Viking women swung into action, knowing that the very survival of their families depended on their preparations for the long winter ahead. From dawn till dusk, they could be found bustling around the longhouse and farm, putting up stores of food, bedding, and provisions. The women processed the meat and hides from livestock slaughtered in fall, smoking and salting the cuts to last through winter. Herbs, wild berries, and nuts were gathered and dried for the cold months when fresh produce was scarce. Dairy animals needed to be milked, and the milk turned into butter and cheese to be packed away. Grains and vegetables from the harvest required threshing, winnowing, and proper storage. But it wasn't just foodstuffs that occupied Viking women as winter approached. This was also the time to ready the family's cold weather clothing. Throughout the year, women created lovingly handcrafted garments for their households. They took wool shorn from their sheep in spring or summer and spun it into yarn using drop spindles and whirls implements often found in female graves. With their handheld looms, they wove this yarn into wadmile, the coarse, dense woolen fabric used for everything from leggings and dresses to sacks, blankets, and sails. The front rooms of long houses frequently contained paired vertical looms where women spent countless hours weaving. The thick, heavy wadden was protection against the unforgiving Scandinavian winter. But Viking women didn't just settle for utilitarian clothing. Colourful embroidery, tablet-woven bands, and gleaming brooches to fasten garments turned necessity into works of art. Jewelry, too, was an essential element of a woman's handiwork, especially among wealthier families. Impossibly intricate gold and silver bess, pendants, and earrings have been uncovered from female burial sites across the Viking world. Far from mere decorative bless, this ornamentation conveyed important messages about a woman's identity, status, and family connections. The fruits of women's textile and handicraft labours were on display each autumn at important seasonal markets and fairs. Here, women bartered or sold their surplus to acquire goods they couldn't produce themselves. Fine metalwork, shells, beads, silk, spices, and more made their way into Viking households through such savvy exchanges. But perhaps the most miraculous transformation women worked each fall was turning the summer bounty into beer and mead. Viking law held the woman of the house responsible for brewing considered a nearly sacred task. For the all-important winter feasts and religious holidays, Viking women concocted heady, carefully fermented drinks from grain and honey. The beer and mead nourished body and soul through the dark months, not to mention smoothing over social frictions among household members stuck indoors together for long periods. And the stirring kaval songs women sang while brewing were said to imbue the drink with luck and spiritual properties. As the first snowflakes swirled and the wind howled around the long house walls, Viking women could rest, assured they had done all in their power to safeguard their families against winter's deprivations. In more southerly climes, other Europeans marveled at and found hard to fathom the sheer industry and capability of Norse women. Over 1,000 years ago, an Arab diplomat named Ibn Fadlan left a description of a group of Viking women he encountered in Russia. Each woman wears on either breast a box of iron, silver, copper, or gold. The value of the box indicates the wealth of the husband. Each box has a ring from which depends a knife. The women wear neck rings of gold and silver, one for each 10,000 dirhams which her husband is worth. Some women have many. Their most prized ornaments are green glass beads of the same kind that are found on ships. They trade beads among themselves and pay a dirham for a bead. They string them as necklaces for their women. For Ibn Fadlan, these hard-working yet splendidly ornamented women were the very emblem of Viking culture. Clearly, the women's skill at handicrafts, value as ambassadors of Norse identity, and economic contributions had made a deep impression on this outsider. In fact, the Arab delegation came to realize just how much sway these women held in their society. Ibn Flan observed disapprovingly that if a Viking man and woman liked each other, she will invite him to her house, and they will go and make love. Her husband will find them like that, but he won't be upset by it. Though Ibn Fedland cast aspersions on what he saw as the promiscuity of Viking women, his account points to the unusual sexual freedoms and co-equal status they enjoyed compared to most of their European sisters. A Viking woman had the right to divorce her husband if she was dissatisfied with him or the marriage. She maintained control over her personal property, mourning gift, and dowry in the event of a split. And while a woman was expected to be fruitful and bear children, she was not without recourse when it came to reproduction. The medieval Icelandic law code Gragas contains a passage suggesting that women had access to contraception and abortion. If a woman is suspected of having slept with a man, she may clear herself by ordeal. But if it is discovered that she is pregnant, she cannot clear herself. If it is not known who the father is, she shall name him and then carry that child to term. She shall not have an abortion. The implication is that a woman could end a pregnancy as long as she hadn't publicly revealed it or named the father. Archaeologists have found evidence that Viking women may have used herbal abortifacients containing plants like juniper, articia, and tansy. Of course, the pressures to produce heirs, especially sons, must have weighed heavily on Viking women. A family's land and wealth were passed down through the male line. Without brothers, a woman usually could not inherit from her parents unless she was an only child. While divorce was permissible, infertility was often cited as a reason for a husband to set his wife aside. For aristocratic women, childbearing was even more politicized. Daughters could be married off to cement alliances between powerful families. The mothers of kings derived influence and prestige from their royal sons. One can imagine the devastation of Queen Oza, described in the Ingalinga saga, when her son King Halfdan died as a young man. Oza took it very much to heart that her son Haldan was dead, and he had been king only a short time. She said that he was much too eager to go to Valhalla and abandon his kingdom and the life that was intended for him. The dangers of childbirth were all too real in the Viking Age, and not even queens were spared. The great love story of Egil's saga revolves around the tall and beautiful Asgarda, who first married Egil's brother, Thor. On a trading expedition to England, Thor was killed, leaving Asgarda a young widow. Egil agreed to take vengeance on his brother's slayers. But when he returned to Iceland victorious, he discovered that Asgarda had already been remarried to his rival Skallagrim. The heartbroken Egil carried a torch for Asgarda for years. Finally, after much sorrow and bloodshed, Asgarda was widowed once again. At last, she and Egil were free to marry, but their happiness was short-lived. Asgodid died giving birth to their second child together. Egil, mad with grief, went into self-imposed exile. He even refused to attend his beloved's funeral. In the end, it was Asgard's daughter, Torgot, who convinced Egil to return home and place a run stone on his wife's burial mound. The stone still stands today near the Icelandic town of Borg, enduring testimony to one woman whose life and loves had such a profound impact on those around her. Indeed, Viking Age sagas and myths are full of such complex female characters who wield influence through strategic marriages and motherhood. Queen Gunhild, wife of Norway's first king, Eric Bloodaxe, was a formidable player on the political stage of 10th century Scandinavia. Gunhild was the daughter of a Danish king. She first wed Eric's brother, Halon. But when Halfdan died, Eric inherited his lands and wife. A beautiful and ambitious woman, Gunhild bore Eric many sons and urged him to eliminate his rival siblings. After a long and bloody struggle, Eric was driven from Norway into exile. But even then, Gunhild continued to scheme for her son's advantage. She negotiated their fosterage with the English king Athlan, who was so taken with her that he became the boy's protector. Though Eric and Gunhild both met violent ends, their sons went on to reclaim dominion over Norway and rule as kings. For good or ill, it was Gunhild's fierce intelligence and iron determination, not just her royal womb, that proved instrumental to her progeny's success. While Gunhild's path to power ran through the birthing bed, other women found less conventional routes to authority and influence. In the Laxdala saga, we meet Unar, the deep-minded, one of the most remarkable female characters in Old Norse literature. Born a Ketilsdottir in Ireland, Unar was the daughter of a Norse king. At a young age, she married a Viking settler in the Scottish Hebdes named Olaf the White. Together they sailed to Dublin, where Olaf became a great warrior king. Unar gave her husband a son and grandson, but eventually Olaf fell in battle, leaving Unar a widow in precarious political circumstances. Undaunted, Unar secretly commissioned the building of a ship. She loaded it with her family's portable wealth and set sail for Iceland with a hand-picked crew. In Iceland, Unar claimed vast stretches of empty land which she generously aortioned among her supporters. She established her own farmstead and became renowned for her wisdom and foresight. Even the law speaker and chieftain Thorstein looked to Uno for advice. In her later years, Uno decided she wanted to marry off her favorite granddaughter, Olaf, to Thorin's son. On her deathbed, she stage-managed a splendid 3-day feast. With her last breath, she betrothed the couple, and it was done. Unor was buried in a ship under a mound of earth like a queen. Ananor the Deep-Minded was exceptional by any standard, but her story speaks to the possibilities open to women, even in a male-dominated society, if they had wits, wealth, and sheer force of personality. While Una started out as a traditional wife and mother, she ended up as a female settler, landowner, and chieftain in her own right, an inspiration to generations of Icelanders. Even women of humbler backgrounds sometimes led lives that defied expectations. Consider the well-known account of an unnamed Viking woman that appears in the 12th century Russian primary chronicle. During a Viking siege of a Slavic settlement in 971, food ran desperately low. The townspeople began to starve, but one enterprising Viking woman saved the day. According to the chronicler, on the eastern side of the town there was a trench, and the besieged Rus decided to hang themselves out of hunger. But one old woman said, "Do not hang yourselves yet, listen to me. We have no honey in the town, so let us prepare a mixture of hops and flour and drink it so that we may last a few more days." They listened to her and survived, for they attacked the Varangians who had surrounded them and fought their way through. Apparently, this quick-thinking Viking woman whipped up a crude beer that gave the defenders the strength to break the siege. In doing so, she not only preserved the town, but supplied it with the beverage it's still famous for today. As this settlement was none other than the Russian city of Pava, known for its rich brewing tradition. Such tantalizing snippets from the chronicles hint at a wider world of women's ingenuity and leadership that largely went unrecorded. Along with the mentions of shield maidens and women buried with weapons, they suggest there were more females taking on unconventional roles than the sagas typically recount. One unusual account in the 12th century Danish history, Guestadorum, even tells of a pair of pirate women in Viking Age Sweden. Stikla and Rusila were widows of warriors who decided to launch their own marauding careers to avenge their fallen husbands. Cross-dressing as men, Stikla and Rusila recruited a crew of like-minded women and took to the seas, but it wasn't long before their ship was captured by the Danish hero Ragnar Lothrog. Impressed by the courage of these women warriors, Ragnar freed the captives and incorporated them into his own forces. While this tale of cross-dressing pirates seems far-fetched, archaeologists have in fact discovered the remains of women buried with weapons and warrior regalia. In 1889, excavators of a Viking burial mound in Birka, Sweden, were shocked to uncover a sword-bearing skeleton that appeared to be female. Though some doubted the accuracy of the original field notes, a 2017 DNA analysis confirmed the Birka individual was a woman interred in the mid-10th century. She was buried with a sword, axe, spear, arrows, a knife, shields, and 2 horses. Gaming pieces suggest she may have been a military commander. Just how many of these warrior women existed is a matter of heated debate. Some scholars believe they were few and far between, either outliers or ritual warrior burials that didn't reflect the deceased's actual occupation. Others argue that the evidence points to a sizable minority of women who really did live the military life. Factual or not, the idea of the shield maiden certainly loomed large in Viking Age imaginations. The Valkyries, terrifying yet alluring female warriors, are among the most captivating figures in Old Norse mythology, half supernatural beings, half human. These choosers of the slain were responsible for selecting who lived and died on the battlefield. Fallen warriors who met with Valkyrie approval were spirited away to Valhalla, Odin's great hall, where they would fight by day and feast by night until the last battle at Ragnarok. Valkyries like Brynhilde, Sigrun, and Sava also turn up in the heroic sagas. Beautiful, headstrong, and deadly with a spear, these shield maidens both aid and bed the mortal heroes they take a shine to. But woe to any man who runs afoul of a Valkyrie. In the saga of the Volungs, the Valkyrie Brynhilde battles the hero Sigurd to disastrous ends. Brynhilde loved Sigurd, but he was tricked into betraying her with another woman. Consumed by jealousy, Brynhilde incited her brothers to murder Sigurd in his bed. As Sigurd's funeral paced, a grief-stricken Brynhilde threw herself on the flames, stabbing herself with a sword, her final request to be burned alongside Sigurd so they might ride together to the afterlife. Even in death, the formidable shield maiden had to have her way. But not all female warriors of legend were so implacable. One of the most endearing appears in Hervar Saga, an Icelandic tale from the 1200s. Hervor is the daughter of the infamous Anganta, who acquired a cursed sword that brought him nothing but trouble. Spirited and stubborn, young Hervor insisted on learning swordsmanship and archery instead of ladylike pursuits. She dressed as a man and joined a Viking crew, which she soon came to lead on far-flung adventures. But Hervor couldn't escape her father's legacy. In the dead of night, Hervor rode alone to the haunted island where her father lay buried. Undeterred by the ghostly, flickering lights dancing over the burial mounds, Hervor marched right up to Angantyr's barrero and demanded he hand over his sword. "Wake up, Angantyr. Hervor wakes you, Topher's only daughter. From the grave, give me the tempered sword. Havel got made by dwarfs." But Angante, knowing the Blad's baleful history, was loathed to let his only child inherit such a burden. From within the depths of his tomb, he tried to warn her off. "Hervor, daughter, why do you call so? Full of troll fierceness, you wander, alone at night among undead at the grave gates. Neither father nor family you resemble." A lively Barrero-side argument ensued, neither father nor daughter willing to back down. Finally, with a great clattering groan, Angantyr hurled the sword out of the burial mound, admonishing Hervor that the weapon would be the ruin of her family. Undaunted, Hervor snatched up the sword. The world of courtship and marriage was one fraught with both opportunity and peril for Viking-age women. Most marriages were arranged by families when the bride and groom were still children. Prospective husbands and their kin would negotiate with the girl's father or male relatives, often sweetening the deal with lavish gifts and promises of alliances. The woman herself had little say in selecting her mate, but she was not without legal protections. Viking law stipulated that the husband had to provide his wife with a substantial dowry, usually consisting of movable goods like livestock, jewelry, furniture, and fine clothing. This dowry remained the woman's personal property throughout the marriage, giving her a degree of financial independence and security. The wedding itself was a festive occasion steeped in ritual and symbolism. The ceremony often took place on a Friday, a day sacred to the goddess Frigga, and associated with love and fertility. Relatives and friends gathered to witness the exchange of sacred vows and the invocation of the gods' blessings upon the couple. In one charming tradition, the groom presented his new bride with keys to the household's various locks, chests, and doors, a symbolic gesture entrusting her with both the practical and spiritual management of the family's domestic affairs. With the wedding feast concluded, the couple was escorted to the bridal bed, where specially chosen relatives would await confirmation that the marriage had been consummated, sealing the union in the eyes of society and the law. But however jubilant the wedding celebration, marriage for Viking women was no carefree endeavor. Chief among a wife's duties was to provide her husband with children, especially sons, to carry on his name and inheritance. In a world where many infants did not survive their first year, Viking women faced immense pressure to conceive and bear healthy offspring. Childbirth was fraught with danger in an age before modern medicine, and many mothers did not survive the ordeal. Those who did had to balance the unceasing demands of child-rearing with a host of other household responsibilities. Motherhood shaped Viking women's lives and identities in profound ways. Infant girls and boys were valued rather equally in Norse society, as both could grow up to contribute essential labor and skills to the family enterprise. Newborns were sprinkled with water in a naming ceremony called the Aosa Vatni, where they received the name and social status they would carry throughout life. Babies were named for ancestors or mythological figures, with parents hoping to confer some of that namesake's luck and desirable qualities onto their child. For a vivid glimpse into the marital dynamics of the Viking elite, we can look to the life of Al the Deep-Minded, whose dramatic saga spanned 3 husbands, several kingdoms, and the open seas. Born to a prominent Norwegian family around 850 AD, Odd was married off as a young teenager to Olaf the White, the Viking king of Dublin. She bore him a son, Thorstein the Red, before Olaf's untimely death in battle against the Irish. Undaunted, Odd took charge of her late husband's kingdom, marrying off her sisters to forge key political alliances in the region. Eventually, Odd set sail for Iceland with her son Thorstein, who hoped to establish his own domain there. Tragedy struck once again when Thorstein too fell in battle shortly after arriving on the island. Now doubly widowed, Odd could have faded into obscurity. But she had other plans. She rallied her followers and claimed a huge swathe of western Iceland as her own, parceling out choice farmlands to family and loyal retainers. At the ripe old age of 80, Odd the Deep-Minded arranged strategic marriages for her many grandchildren, ensuring her dynasty would endure through the generations. Formidable, foresightful, and unflagging, Odd embodied the agency and grit with which some Viking women navigated the twists of fate they were dealt. While most could never hope to wield Odd's clout, they too found ways to maneuver within their circumstances, forging lives of purpose and meaning on their own terms. Marriage and motherhood may have defined women's existence in that time and place, but those roles were no mere prisons. In the hands of the crafty and capable, they could serve as springboards to new possibilities. Within the strict but somewhat flexible framework of Viking gender roles, women carved out spheres of influence that were subtle but significant. One key source of their power was sexuality. While virginity was prized in unmarried girls, Viking culture afforded women a degree of sexual freedom that was quite radical for the era. The sagas tell of many women who openly took lovers, flouting the conventions of fidelity, though adulterous wives did risk harsh punishments if caught in the act. The mythology and literature celebrated sexually assertive women like the fearsome Valkyries, who chose the slain warriors worthy to enter Valhalla. Powerful goddesses like Freya, patroness of fertility, embodied the link between female sexuality and the fecundity of the natural world. While the myths reflected cultural ideals more than daily realities, they still suggested a society that acknowledged women's erotic desires and potential. Perhaps surprisingly for the time, Viking women had the right to divorce their husbands on various grounds, such as infertility, infidelity, or physical abuse. The process was fairly straightforward. The wife simply had to declare her intention before witnesses and leave the marital home with her dowie in hand. Of course, walking away from an unhappy union carried risks and hardships, especially for women with young children. But the mere existence of this escape hatch gave wives a modicum of leverage in their relationships. Some intrepid women pushed the boundaries of sexual freedom even further. One legendary example was Signy, a noble woman who endured a miserable arranged marriage to the brutish king Sigar. After Sigar slaughtered Signy's entire family, the embittered wife began plotting her revenge. She disguised herself and seduced her own twin brother to produce a son strong enough to defeat Sigar and his clan. Was Signy a conniving adulteress? An incestuous traitor, perhaps, but she was also a woman determined to turn her body into a weapon against the men who had wronged her. While surviving historical accounts are sketchy, there are hints that some Viking women had access to herbal contraceptives and abortive patients to control their fertility. Excavations have unearthed seeds and pollen from plants known to have medicinal properties related to women's reproductive health. The idea of women wielding such knowledge is quite plausible, as they were often the ones tasked with growing, preparing, and administering herbal remedies of all kinds. Though the Norse gods were a lusty bunch, their myths also served up cautionary tales about the dangers of unbridled female sexuality. Consider the bewitching giantess's Gerd, who so inflamed the god Freyr with lust that he gave away his magic sword for a chance to bed her. That missing sword would later cost Freyr his life in the apocalyptic battle of Ragnarok. Or ponder poor Baldur, most beloved of the gods, whose blind brother was tricked into killing him by the scheming vixen Loki in female form. Over and over we see the tension between alluring and threatening female sexual power. For mere mortal women, though, that power was tightly constrained. The sexual double standard was alive and well in the Viking Age. While men's dances were winked at, women were held to a far stricter code of propriety. An unwed mother, or a woman known to have taken many lovers, would have found it difficult to make a good marriage match. Her perceived value was inextricably linked to her virtue, or at least the public performance of it. But some brave women chose to navigate their sexuality on their own terms, no matter the risks or reproach. In their world of limited choices, even small acts of erotic defiance could feel revolutionary. By claiming the right to pursue pleasure, to decide when and with whom to share the intimate gifts of their bodies, these unconventional women quietly redefined the boundaries of the permissible. They left a legacy of boldness and self-possession that still resonates down the centuries. Of course, sexuality was but one facet of the richly complex lives Viking women led. At the heart of their world was the home, the vital center around which all of Viking society revolved. And running those households was no simple matter, especially on the large, prosperous farms of the elite. Managing the domestic realm was akin to overseeing a bustling corporation, with a lady of the house as its CEO. The lady's most visible symbol of authority was her jingling belt of keys, tools that gave her control over the farm's precious food stores, linens, valuables, and beyond. Each day she would rise early to unlock the sheds and pantries, doling out the provisions needed to feed and clothe her sizable brood. And what a brood it was! Not just her husband and children, but also aging parents, aunts and uncles, siblings and cousins, foster children, not to mention servants, slaves, and traveling guests expecting hospitality. To keep everyone hale and hearty, she had to be a mistress of multitasking. Between meals, a stream of chores kept her in constant motion. One moment she might be churning butter or brewing ale, the next grinding flour, tending herbs, or mucking out the barn. Weaving, spinning, and sewing consumed any spare seconds. Springtime meant planting fields and gardens, gathering eggs, milking ewes. As the days grew colder, she would smoke meats, preserve cheeses, and store grains and vegetables to last the long winter. All the while, she had to maintain harmony and order among her diverse household. That meant breaking up squabbles between children, soothing feuding relatives, and keeping a close eye on the comingings and goings of her servants and theirs. She was a manager, a mediator, a wise woman whose word was law within her domestic domain. We can see this power reflected in the elaborate grave goods often buried with high-status women. At the famous Osberg ship burial in Norway, archaeologists were amazed to find the remains of two women interred with a trove of costly treasures. Mingled among the imported silks, gilded sleighs, and ornate furnishings were everyday items that hinted at the women's lofty roles in life. Chief among those mundane objects were keys, dozens of them, some iron, some brass, ranging from dainty to the size of a man's hand. These were likely the symbols of the women's authority over their lavish estates. Also telling were the textile-making tools buried with them, including looms, wool hams, and spindle worlds of the finest craftsmanship. Weaving was closely associated with female power and prestige in Norse culture, an art that transformed raw materials into essential goods while embodying the threads of family and fate. Some experts believe one of the Osberg women may have been Queen Asa, grandmother of the first king of Norway. While her exact identity is still debated, her burial and the keys she took to her grave clearly testify to her influence, an authority rooted in her masterful management of worldly affairs. She and countless capable women like her formed the backbone of the Viking domestic sphere, a realm easily discounted but no less essential to Norse cultural vitality than masculine exploits of raiding and trading. As we've seen, Viking women led lives that were in many ways defined by their domestic roles and responsibilities. But while managing a household and raising children may have been their primary duties, this did not mean women were mere background characters in Viking society. Far from it, many found ways to exert influence and agency both within the home and in the wider world. One key way women wielded power was through their control of household resources. In a subsistence agricultural society, food was wealth, and it was women who oversaw the processing and storage of grains, dairy products, and preserved meats that kept their families fed throughout the harsh Nordic winters. And this gave them significant economic clout. Some historians believe women may have even used food as a political tool, withholding meals from those who displeased them, including their own husbands. Viking women were also responsible for textile production, a crucially important industry in a society where everything from clothing to sails to tapestries were made by hand. Weaving in particular was a highly valued skill practiced almost exclusively by women. Textile historian Michelle Hayer Smith has argued that weaving was seen as a kind of magic, a way of creating order from chaos that paralleled the god's act of creation. The tools of the weaver's trade, looms, spindles, whorls, are among the most common grave goods found in female Viking burials. At the famous Oseberg ship burial in Norway, a pair of ornately decorated weaving looms were interred, along with two high-status women and a lavish array of other treasures. Scholars believe the Osberg queen may have been a priestess of the fertility goddess Freya, who was closely associated with weaving and women's handicrafts. The quality and artistry of a woman's handiwork was a source of personal and familial pride. Pieces like the exquisite over-Hogdal wall hangings dated to the Viking Age showcase the incredible skill and creativity of the anonymous women who designed and wooed these works. The finest textiles were prized trade goods exported and sold across the Viking world and beyond. Women who produced surplus cloth and clothing could achieve significant economic independence. Some enterprising women even ventured into long-distance trade, accompanying their merchant husbands on voyages or sending goods to be sold overseas. A woman named Gudrid is recorded as having made multiple trips between Greenland, Iceland, and Newfoundland in the early 11th century, surviving shipwrecks and other hazards. Another account tells of a wealthy Norse woman in Ireland who owned and sailed her own ships for trading expeditions. While such globe-trotting female traders may have been relatively rare, many Viking women engaged in local commerce, selling their handicrafts or surplus household goods at markets and fairs. They also played an important role in negotiating trade agreements and setting prices for the farm's products. This commercial involvement could give women a degree of financial autonomy, especially if they were widowed or unmarried and controlled their own assets. Women might also gain influence through their religious role. In pre-Christian Viking society, women could serve as priestesses and oracles, conducting rituals and divining the future. The most famous of these was the vulva, a Tyrus, who travelled between communities practicing a form of magic known as cider. This shamanistic tradition involved going into a trance and communicating with spirits to gain knowledge and power. While cider was not exclusively a female domain, it does seem to have been a practice closely associated with women and with the goddess Freya, who was said to have taught it to the gods and humans. In the Norse poem, Loena, the trickster god Loki, taunts the god Odin for practicing cider, saying it is unmanly of him. This suggests that cider may have been seen as a feminine form of spiritual power. The Velva were both respected and feared in Viking society. They were consulted on matters of great importance, like the outcome of a battle or the prospects for a coming season, but they were also somewhat taboo figures set apart from ordinary society by their uncanny abilities. In the saga of Eric the Red, a Cirrus named Thorbjorg is described as wearing a blue cloak covered in jewels with a hood of black lambskin and a staff topped with a brass knob. Her strange appearance and cryptic pronouncements lent her an aura of mystery and authority. With the coming of Christianity in the late Viking Age, the old pagan traditions were gradually suppressed. But this did not necessarily diminish women's religious influence. Some of the earliest Christian converts in Scandinavia were women who perhaps saw in the new faith a chance for greater spiritual equality. The 10th century Icelandic matriarch out the deep-minded is said to have built her own church on her land, defying the old Norse gods. As Christianity took hold, women continued to play important roles as abbesons, nuns, and religious patrons. Royal women in particular were often at the forefront of Christianization efforts, using their influence to spread the new faith. The Danish Queen Thera, for example, is credited with persuading her husband, King Gorm the Old, to convert in the mid-10th century. She raised the landmark Jellingstone in Jutland, Denmark, which bears one of the earliest depictions of Christ in Scandinavia. Of course, not all Viking women wielded power through religion, trade, or textile work. A select few are remembered as warriors and adventurers in their own right, the famed shield maidens of Norse legend. While the idea of Viking warrior women has long been dismissed as fantasy, recent archaeological finds suggest there may be more truth to these tales than previously believed. In 2017, DNA analysis revealed that a richly furnished Viking grave in Birka, Sweden, long assumed to hold a male warrior, actually belonged to a woman. Her burial included a full set of weapons, gaming pieces, and 2 horses, pointing to her high status as a fighter. While this Burka warrior woman is so far one of a kind, her existence lends credence to the accounts of shield maidens found in Norse sagas and myths. One such legendary figure is Lagartha, a fearsome fighter said to have caught the eye of the famous Viking hero Ragnar el Brock. According to the 12th century Danish chronicler Saxo Grammaticus, Lagartha fought at Ragnar's side in a great battle, her long hair flowing loose as she mowed down the enemy with her sword. Impressed by her prowess, Ragnar sought and won her hand in marriage, though the saga says Lagartha later divorced him when he took another wife. Whether Lathir really existed or not, her story speaks to the ideal of the strong, independent Viking woman celebrated in Norse folklore. Other famous shield maidens include Hervor, who wields a cursed sword and leads a band of Viking raiders, and Brynhild, the Valkyrie-turned-mortal warrior queen, who helps orchestrate the downfall of the hero Sigurd. While clearly mythologized, these figures may reflect a grain of truth about the roles some women played in Viking warfare and raiding. More certain is the vital part Viking women played as settlers and colonists in the great Norse diaspora of the 9th to 11th centuries. As male Vikings ventured west, conquering and settling new lands, women were essential to establishing permanent communities. In Iceland, for instance, early settlers included many prominent widows who set up their own farms and became matriarchs of sprawling clans. These intrepid female pioneers faced all the challenges of frontier life, from harsh weather to hostile neighbors. In the Greenland saga, Freydis Eric's daughter, the daughter of the famous explorer Eric the Red, leads an expedition to Finland, likely Newfoundland. There she quarrels with the other settlers, even killing several of them in a fit of rage. While her temper may be exaggerated, Freydis's story hints at the kinds of conflicts that could arise as Viking settlers competed for resources and power in a new land. As Viking society expanded and evolved, women continued to adapt to new roles and expectations. In the later Viking Age, as towns and trade grew, some women found opportunities in urban professions like innkeeping, brewing, and craft production. Others joined the great tide of Norse settlers flowing into the British Isles, Iceland, and beyond, helping to shape new societies that would long outlast the Viking Age itself. Throughout it all, Viking women remained the backbone of their families and communities, upholding traditions and forging new paths as needed. Their stories, long neglected, are an essential part of the Norse saga, one that is still being written as new discoveries shed fresh light on these remarkable historical figures. As we continue to explore the complex and dynamic world of Viking women, we can only marvel at their resilience, creativity, and enduring legacy. In the far north of Scotland, on the wind-swept shores of Caith, a Viking woman named Gira stood at the edge of a cliff, gazing out across the grey expanse of the North Sea. The salty wind tugged at her woolen cloak and whipped strands of her golden hair across her face. Gera was born in the early 11th century in the twilight years of the Viking Age. She was the daughter of a Norse chieftain who had settled in northern Scotland and married a local Pictish woman. Like many of her peers, Gyra's life straddled two worlds, the fading realm of her Viking forebears and the emerging landscape of medieval Scotland. As a child, Gira learned the domestic arts expected of a young Norse Scottish woman. Her mother and aunts taught her to grind grain into flour, churn milk into cheese, and brew ale in large wooden barrels. She learned to spin wool, weave cloth, and sew warm garments to protect against the biting cold of the northern winters. These skills would serve Gyra well when she eventually took charge of her own household, but Gyra's upbringing also reflected her Viking heritage. From a young age, her father schooled her in Norse lore and legends, filling her imagination with tales of the gods and heroes of old. On snowy evenings, the family would gather around the central hearth of their long house, listening to stories and poems passed down through countless generations of their Viking ancestors. Gyra learned that women featured prominently in these tales, from the fierce Valkyries who rode over battlefields choosing the slain to sorceresses and seers who could weave magic and foretell the future. There were shield maidens who fought alongside male warriors and legendary queens whose cunning and courage outshone their kingly husbands. While Gyra knew these figures resided in the realm of myth, they shaped her idea of the vital roles women could play in the world. As she grew older, Gyra saw how women's experiences in her own family and community both reflected and defied the old stories. Her mother, born to a Pictish noble family, wielded significant influence, weaving ties of kinship and diplomacy with neighbouring Scottish clans. She arranged the marriages of Gyra's older siblings, carefully balancing the family's interests with the desires of their children. Gyra's aunt Ragnar, in contrast, had eschewed marriage altogether, taking on the respected position of a vulva, or seer, in their community. Ragnar was consulted on matters ranging from the health of livestock to the auspiciousness of a voyage, and her prophecies carried great weight. Sometimes visiting the wise woman in her herb-scented dwelling, Gyra wondered if she too might be called to a spiritual path. But the winds of fate had other plans for Gra. At the age of 15, she was betrothed to the son of a neighbouring chieftain, a political match that would consolidate territory and trading interests in the region. Gyra met her, intended only once before the wedding, when the tall, solemn youth named Askell visited her father's hall to negotiate the details of her bride price and dowry. As her wedding day approached, Gra's female kin enveloped her in a flurry of preparations. They sewed her wedding gown, gathered herbs for her bridal crown, and instructed her in what to expect in the marriage bed. Gyra's mother presented her with the keys to her new household, a potent symbol of the domestic authority she would now wield. On a crisp autumn day, Gra and Askell stood before their assembled families and community to exchange the sacred vows of marriage. Gyra's father passed her a sword, both a tribute to their Viking ancestry and a symbol of the transfer of her protection to her new husband. Askell presented his ancestral sword to Gyra in turn, a ritual gesture entrusting his lineage and honor to her keeping. As the celebrations swirled around the Mee Hall that night, Gyra felt a mix of anticipation and apprehension. She would be leaving behind the world of her childhood, with its familiar rhythms and cherished bonds, to build a new life and family with Askell. While she had been raised to expect and even welcome this transition, a part of her still mourned the carefree years of her maidenhood. In the weeks following the wedding, Gyra threw herself into her new role as mistress of Askell's household. There was much to be done, supplies to be managed, meals to oversee, alliances with neighbouring women to build. Gyra took a quiet pride in her ability to run a complex household, a power she could see mirrored in the capable women around her. As the years passed, Gyra bore Askell 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, her treasured Seni named for a legendary queen. Gyra rejoiced in her children, raising them as she herself had been raised, with an ear for the old stories and a heart for adventure. She taught her daughter the womanly arts, but also delighted in her son's progress in hunting and swordcraft. Askell was often absent, tending to affairs of defence and diplomacy, so the children's early years were shaped most by their mother's steady presence. But even as she poured her energy into her family, Gyra never lost her yearning for a wider world. She persuaded Askell to take her on trading voyages to Orkney in Dublin, relishing the chance to see new vistas and barter for exotic goods. At home, she became known as a skilled healer, sought out by folk for miles around. The old knowledge of herbs and charms ran strong in her veins. As her children grew older and more independent, Gyra found herself drawn back to the spiritual callings of her youth. She studied the runes and staves of the old magic, learning to divine the future as her aunt had done. In time, she took on the mantle of Velva herself, becoming a respected wise woman and seer. It was a role that granted her a new kind of influence, one not tied to her husband's status or her son's exploits. Gazing out at the wild sea from her cliffside perch, Gyra reflected on the many seasons of her life. She had been maiden, wife, mother, trader, healer, and seer. She had known love, loss, adventure, and power. While her world was changing with new gods and kings reshaping the land, Gyra still looked to the old ways for wisdom and strength. As the sun sank below the waves, painting the sea and sky in shades of fire, Gyra pulled her cloak close against the chill. She thought of her daughter Sani, now grown with children of her own, carrying the stories of their mothers forward. She thought of the Viking women who had come before her, those who had crossed oceans and built worlds. Their blood flowed in her veins. Their memories whispered in her heart. With a last long look at the darkening horizon, Gyra turned for home, where the fire burned bright in the hearth, and the tales of her people waited to be told anew. She walked proudly in the footsteps of the women who had shaped her world, knowing that their legends would endure long after her own days were through. The Viking Age was a time of profound change and cultural fusion as Norse peoples explored, raided, and settled across vast swathes of Europe and beyond. Women were an integral part of this age of transformation, not just as passive subjects, but as active agents shaping their own destinies and those of their families and communities. The stories of Viking women that come down to us today are often fragmented or filtered through the lens of later medieval chroniclers. But by piecing together these glimpses and interpreting the archaeological record with fresh eyes, we can begin to assemble a fuller picture of these remarkable women's lives. From the intrepid explorers who sailed to Iceland, Greenland, and even North America, to the powerful queens and chieftains' wives who shaped political fortunes, Viking women left an indelible mark on their world. They managed farms and trading operations, practiced medicine and magic, and even on rare occasion took up arms and went to battle. But more often their power was exercised in the domestic sphere through the subtle sway of influence rather than the overt force of command. In a pre-Iterate society, women were the keepers of memory, the tellers of tales, and the weavers of family and cultural bonds. They shaped their world not in spite of their traditional roles, but through them. The Viking Age was a time when the old gods still held sway, but the new faith of Christianity was making inroads. Women, as the guardians of household religion, played a key role in navigating this spiritual transition. Some, like Aud the deep-minded, embraced the white Christ. Others, like Guerra, continued to find meaning in the old rituals and magic. But whether they worshipped Thor or the Trinity, Viking women drew upon deep wells of courage, resilience, and wisdom to forge lives of purpose and passion. They endured the pangs of childbirth and the pain of loss. They celebrated weddings and festivals. They made lonely voyages and built new homes on far shores. Through it all, they wove the threads of their own stories into the grand tapestry of the Viking Age. Their names may be lost to time, but their legacy endures in the bones of the earth and the blood of their descendants. In the tales that have come down to us, in the poems and sagas and songs, we can still hear the echoes of their voices, strong and clear across the centuries. So let us remember the women of the Viking Age not as footnotes or afterthoughts, but as the true heart and soul of a world in motion. From the icy fjords of Scandinavia to the green fields of England, from the rocky shores of Scotland to the mist-shrouded coasts of Newfoundland, these women left their mark on history. Their stories deserve to be told. As we drift off to sleep this night, let us dream of the Viking women who came before us, the mothers and maidens, the healers and seers, the weavers of magic and memory. Let us honor their courage and resilience, their love and their loss, and let us carry their stories forward so that future generations may know the truth of the Viking Age. Not just the battles and the blood, but the beauty and the bravery of the women who shaped it. In the hush of the evening, as the fire burns low and the night draws close, we remember the Viking women who walked this earth 1,000 years ago. We remember Gira standing on her windswept cliff, gazing out to sea with eyes that held the wisdom of the ages. We remember Old crossing oceans with courage and faith, planting the seeds of new worlds. We remember her Vor, the shield maiden who claimed her father's sword and her own destiny. These women and countless others like them are the warp and weft of the Viking story, the bright threads that bind it all together. They remind us that even in the darkest of times, even in a world shaped by the clash of swords and the roar of the sea, there is always room for love and laughter, for wisdom and magic. So, as we surrender to sleep, let us carry their stories into our dreams. Let us walk the wild roads of the Viking Age, side by side with the women who made it their own. And let us wake in the morning with their strength in our hearts, ready to weave our own tales of courage and wonder. Good night and sweet dreams of the Viking women who came before, who live on in story and song and in the echoes of our own untamed hearts. We've explored the many essential roles Viking women played in their families and communities, from managing farms and households to practicing crafts, trades, and healing arts. But some women took on even more unconventional roles in this warrior society. Let's delve into the legendary shield maidens and the complex realities behind these fabled fighter women. In the old Norse sagas, shield maidens like Brynhild and Hervar are celebrated as fierce warriors and tragic heroines. With their mail coats and sturdy shields, they ride into battle and hold their own against male fighters. Some disguise themselves as men to pursue glory on the battlefield. Others lead armies and become renowned for their prowess and valor. But were shield maidens purely fictional, or did they have some basis in reality? The historical and archaeological evidence is intriguing, if inconclusive. Several old law codes and chronicles do mention women fighting in times of crisis or as part of pagan military cults. And a few weapons graves, most famously one in Birka, Sweden, appear to hold the remains and battle gear of female warriors. Still, these cases are very rare and some have been called into question. While many Viking women likely trained in weapons used to defend their homes and communities if needed, they probably didn't fight in large-scale battles or raids as a norm. Hand-to-hand combat favored upper body strength, making it difficult for most women to equal well-trained male opponents. So the shield maiden was likely more of an archetype than an everyday profession for Viking women. She embodied their society's admiration for bold, independent women, even as most real women focused their prowess on other pursuits. Through stories of these mythic heroines, the Vikings celebrated feminine strength, courage, and unconventionality. One of these reimagined shield maidens is Lagertha, a legendary queen of Denmark whose tale is recounted by the 12th century chronicler Saxo Grammaticus. In his telling, Lagertha is a fierce warrior who wins the heart of the hero Ragnar Lothbrok with her courage in battle. She rules by his side and leads armies to avenge his death, becoming a celebrated queen in her own right. While Lagertha's story blends myth and history, it speaks to the Vikings' esteem for powerful women both on and off the battlefield, and it's a testament to how women have always pushed against the boundaries of the roles society prescribed for them, imagining new possibilities for themselves. This brings us to another vital role Viking women played as cultural bearers who preserved and passed down their people's law, arts, and ways of knowing. In a society without widespread literacy, women were often the keepers of family histories, mythologies, poems, and songs. They curated this cultural heritage and kept it alive for future generations. Some of the most celebrated works of Old Norse literature, like the anonymous poems of the poetic Edda, may have been composed or transmitted by women. These haunting verses, which blend pagan beliefs with timeless human struggles, often center around vivid female characters and their experiences of love, loss, power, and revenge. Through their traditional arts and handicrafts, Viking women also helped define the visual signature of their culture. Their intricate textile designs spread far beyond Scandinavia through trade, becoming coveted and copied across Europe. And the iconic metal brooches and pendants worn by Viking women have become enduring symbols of their society. As traders, settlers, and explorers, Viking women were also instrumental in spreading their culture through the Viking diaspora. They helped establish new colonies and communities from the British Isles to the North Atlantic. And through their networks and mobility, they both imported and exported fashions, tastes, stories, and ideas. One of these intrepid female explorers was Gudrid Torbjörna Doya, whose incredible life story spans continents. Born in Iceland around 980 AD, Gudrid sailed with her father to Greenland as a young woman. There she married a merchant adventurer and accompanied him on a voyage to Vinland, the short-lived Viking settlement in North America. Gudrid gave birth to a son in Vinland, the first European child born in the New World. She would later make a pilgrimage to Rome and end her days as a nun back in Iceland. Through her travels and her faith, Gudrid embodied the dynamic cultural exchanges of the Viking Age and the vital roles women played in them. Gudrid's story, like those of so many Viking women, was preserved in the old Icelandic sagas, the great prose epics written down centuries later. These sagas offer us the most intimate glimpses of Viking women's interior lives, their desires, fears, foibles, and triumphs. Through these stories, real and legendary women leap off the page as complex individuals. There's Brynhild, the shield maiden turned royal wife, whose thwarted passion ends in tragedy. Gud, who loses her husband and brothers to a blood feud, but survives to become a powerful matriarch. The two Freydis Irigs, one a fearsome explorer who fought in Vinland, the other a cunning political player in the Icelandic sagas. While the sagas often cast these women in stock character types, they still offer tantalizing glimpses into the social scripts and expectations Viking women had to navigate. The women alternately conform to and subvert these expectations, finding ways to shape their own destinies. Indeed, as we've seen, Viking women led lives of profound complexity, shaped by their society's constraints, but also resourceful in transcending them through their daily labors and cultural stewardship. They were just as essential to their people's dynamism and endurance as the male explorers and warriors who claimed the spotlight. So, while our popular imagination remains dominated by images of male Viking raiders and kings, we do these fascinating women a disservice by leaving them in the shadows, by piecing together their stories from graves, textiles, sagas, and more. We can begin to restore them to their rightful place in history. We can marvel at the nameless Osberg queen interred in a resplendent ship burial with her finest tapestries and household treasures. Admire the enterprising or the deep-minded who boldly carved out a new life for herself in Iceland. Pay tribute to Siggi Lagartha and Gudrun, whose fierce independence still resonates today. In the end, perhaps the greatest legacy of Viking women is simply the traces of their DNA, both literal and figurative, that have threaded through generations, the families and farms they built, the journeys they undertook, the tales they told, and traditions they tended. We are all inheritors of their fortitude and ingenuity, their pragmatism and their poetry. So the next time you imagine a Viking woman, see her in her glorious complexity, with her weaving sword flying to the loom, her strong hands stirring the cooking pot and steadying the plough, her voice rising in a lullaby or a lament, her eyes gazing over the prow of a ship towards distant shores. Honor her labor and her lore, her sorrows and her triumphs. And remember that her story in all its fascinating fullness is still being written through discovery, scholarship, and storytelling. 1,000 years after she lived, she still has so much to teach us about resilience, resourcefulness, and the timeless ways women have moved through this world. The tales of Viking women that survive in the sagas, poetry, and historical records depict a complex society where women, while often living in a male-dominated world, nevertheless carved out spheres of influence and achieved remarkable things. From bold explorers to wise politicians to feared sorceresses, their stories still resonate down the centuries. One such woman whose life has captured the imagination of generations is Freydis Iris Doya, the daughter of Erik the Red and half-sister of Leif Erikson. Freydis was born into a family of explorers and adventurers in the 10th century Greenland. While records of her life are fragmentary, airy, and blend fact and fiction, the picture that emerges is of a tough, opportunistic, and ruthless woman who let nothing stand in her way. Our most detailed account of Freydis's exploits comes from the saga of the Greenlanders, which chronicles the early Norse expeditions to Vineland, present-day Newfoundland. According to the saga, Freyhus got wind of an expedition being organized by two Icelandic men and convinced them to let her join, contributing a ship and crew in exchange for an equal share of any profits. But tensions quickly arose during the long voyage west. The saga recounts how Freydis, who was pregnant at the time, was walking from her ship to the Icelanders when she came upon the corpse of a fallen comrade. Undaunted, she picked up the dead man's sword and, improvising some makeshift armor from a slab of cheese, continued on to the Icelanders' camp. There she proceeded to incite her crew to attack in order to claim the spoils for themselves. In the saga's telling, she even personally executed 5 women from the Icelanders' party, since none of her male followers would do a deed considered shameful. While the historicity of this gory tale is questionable, with Freydis likely the victim of misogynistic stereotyping, there are corroborating accounts that place her in Finland and suggest the kernel of truth behind her ruthless reputation. A woman traveling on a dangerous exploratory mission was unusual enough, let alone one who ended up in command after her husband suddenly fell ill, that Freys was able to recruit men to follow her, however reluctantly, speaks to her forceful personality and ability to exploit gender roles when it suited her. In the end, the saga records that Freydis made it back to Greenland with a ship full of valuable timber and trade goods, her mission a success despite the bloodshed. No lasting colony was established, but she had achieved her aim of turning a profit. As a postscript, the saga notes that Freydis' ambitions later turned to consolidating power and land back in Greenland, where she clashed with her brother Leif and other settlers. No shrinking violet, she seems to have thrived on conflict her whole life. Archaeological evidence from the Viking settlement at Lanso Meadows, Newfoundland, sheds further light on what life may have been like for Freud and other Norse women in the precarious Vineland colonies. Excavations have uncovered a small building identified as a wool processing workshop, complete with spindle, WHS, and loom weights. This suggests that while the men focused on resource extraction, it was women like Freys who worked to process those raw materials into valuable export products, all while seeing to the domestic needs of the outpost. Life at the edge of the known world would have required women to be just as hardy and multi-talented as the men. But even this distant frontier was not beyond the reach of the Viking exchange networks that spanned the North Atlantic. Luxury items found at the site, like a painted glass bead and a decorated brass pin, may well have been the fruits of trading missions like the one Freydis undertook. The story of Freydis Ioric Doya, like so many tales of Viking women, is a patchwork of history and legend. But even allowing for embellishment, the sagas preserve the memory of women who were more than just homemakers and childbearers. When circumstances demanded it or when opportunity beckoned, they could be explorers, entrepreneurs, and even killers, breaking the mold of medieval womanhood. As the Viking Age drew to a close and Christianity gained a firmer foothold in the north, the social position of women gradually shifted, but the legacy of figures like Frius endured as a reminder of an earlier age of female agency and adventure. In her own way, she and her contemporaries had played a vital role in the Viking expansion, helping to forge a network of trade and settlement that left an indelible mark on the northern world. While we can only catch glimpses of their lives through the filter of time, the extraordinary stories of women like Freydis speak to the broader contributions of Viking women to their society. Far from being passive spectators, they were active participants in everything from farming to politics to exploration. through their toil and talents, their sacrifices and schemes, they helped to build the Viking world, even as they sometimes struggled against its constraints. Of course, the opportunities afforded to Freydis as a woman of elite birth were not available to all. For every shield maiden or sorceress of saga and song, there were countless ordinary women whose names are lost to history. Women who spent their days minding children, spinning wool, stirring pots, and tending to the myriad mundane tasks that kept their families and communities alive. But it would be a mistake to view these everyday labors as insignificant in the harsh and unpredictable world of the medieval North, where famine, disease, and violence were always close at hand. Women's work was quite literally a matter of life and death. A skilled woman who could transform raw ingredients into nourishing food, warm clothing, and healing herbs was worth her weight in gold, whether she wielded a sword or not. Indeed, it was in the domestic sphere that most Viking women found their power and purpose. As keepers of the keys and managers of the household, they enjoyed considerable autonomy and commanded the respect of their men folk. A wife who failed at her duties could be grounds for divorce, just as a husband who failed to provide for his family could be publicly shamed. The sagas and myths are full of wise women and cunning matriarchs who ran their estates with an iron fist, accumulating wealth and forging strategic alliances through marriage and motherhood. Women like Hildiglum, whose foresight and planning saved her family from a vengeful ghost, or Sigrid the Haughty, a wise widow who outsmarted a string of powerful suitors to become Queen of Sweden. These were not women content to remain in the background, but dynamic figures who shaped the fortunes of their families and left their mark on history. And even for women of humbler status, there were still ways to gain influence and agency within the boundaries of their prescribed roles. In a world where literacy was rare and books were precious, women were often the ones who memorized the poems, legends, and lore that formed the backbone of Viking cultural identity. As storytellers and singers, they passed on ancestral knowledge and kept alive the oral traditions that bound their communities together. The Icelandic sagas in particular, with their strong female characters and domestic dramas, are thought to have been shaped by generations of women who spun tales around the fireside to entertain and educate their families through the long winter nights. In this way, even the most ordinary Viking woman could leave an extraordinary legacy, her words and her wisdom echoing down through the ages. And so as we come to the end of our exploration of Viking womanhood, we are left with a sense of both the challenges and opportunities that shape these remarkable women's lives. Theirs was a world of blood and battle, of love and loss, of hardship and hope, a world where even the humblest woman could dream of Valhalla, and where the bravest could forge her own path to glory. Though the Viking Age has long since passed into myth and memory, the story of its women endures as a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. In their struggles and their triumphs, their laughter and their tears, we can see reflections of our own lives and the lives of women throughout history. And so, as we drift off to sleep, let us dream of those distant days when dragon ships sailed the northern seas and shield maidens strode the battlefield. Let us remember the wives and warriors, the explorers and craftswomen, the mothers and sorceresses who helped to shape a world both strange and familiar. And let us honor the legacy of the Viking women whose courage and resilience continue to inspire us to this day. As we've seen, Viking women were not merely passive observers of history. but active participants who shaped their world in ways both profound and intimate. From the grand halls of queens to the birthing beds of farm wives, these women navigated a complex web of social expectations, religious beliefs, and practical demands with resilience, ingenuity, and quiet power. Perhaps no woman embodies this indomitable Viking spirit more than a deep-minded, a 9th-century Norwegian princess who lived a life of adventure and influence that spanned continents. Born into nobility, Aud was married off to a Viking king in Dublin, where she bore a son and daughter before being widowed. Undaunted, Aud took charge of her husband's trading ships and set sail for Orkney, where she married off her daughter to a powerful Jarl. But Odie's adventures were far from over. As political tides shifted, she gathered her family and followers and struck out for Iceland, the wild new frontier of Viking settlement. With her characteristic foresight, Odd had brought a shipload of wood to build a new homestead. She claimed a vast swath of prime farmland and established herself as the matriarch of a prosperous clan. In her later years, Odd even freed her many Scottish slaves, gifting them land to farm. By the time she died in her 80s, Odd had cemented her status as one of Iceland's legendary founding settlers. Odd's remarkable saga is more than just a ripping yarn. It's a testament to the grit, adaptability, and sheer force of will that Viking women brought to bear on their world. Odd was far from alone in her role as a female pioneer. As the Viking diaspora pushed westward, women were often at the forefront of settlement efforts. Take good Thor Bjarnadia, the Farivold wife of Leif Erikson's brother. Gudrid journeyed across Iceland, Greenland, and even Finland, giving birth to the first European baby in North America along the way. Her story, preserved in the saga of the Greenlanders, speaks to the fortitude required of women on the harsh frontiers of the Viking world. But even for women who never left their home farms, the business of daily life demanded deep wells of strength and skill. Far from being cloistered away, Viking women were active in their communities as artisans, merchants, healers, and keepers of cultural wisdom. They tended livestock, oversaw household industries, and produced the textiles that were a mainstay of the Viking economy. Some women even managed their own farms and trading ventures, wielding economic power in their own right. Of course, this is not to say that Viking women's lives were free of constraint or oppression. They lived in a rigidly patriarchal society where their value was often tied to their fertility, and men's social standing ultimately trumped their own. The glorified shield maidens of popular culture, while rooted in some historical truth, were likely the exception rather than the rule. For most women, the battlefield of everyday life was challenge enough. And yet within these constraints, Viking women found ways to carve out spheres of influence and assert their agency. They served as priestesses and oracles, harnessing the power of Norse religion. They composed poetry and passed down precious oral folklore. In the family sagas that preserve so much of Viking culture, women loom large as tragic heroines, wise tacticians, and larger-than-L life personalities. These depictions suggest a begrudging respect for feminine power, even as they uphold male dominance. In the end, perhaps what is most striking about Viking women is their sheer humanity in the face of a world that was often indifferent to their struggles. They loved, mourned, raged, and dreamed just as vibrantly as their male counterparts, even if their names have not echoed through history in the same way. By piecing together their stories from graves and textiles, sagas and song, we can begin to flesh out a more complete vision of the Viking world, one that recognizes the vital contributions of the other half of the sky. As we close this journey through the annals of Viking womanhood, take a moment to marvel at the tenacity of these remarkable women. Their blood runs in the veins of millions today, from the fjords of Scandinavia to the farthest reaches of the Viking diaspora. In their struggles and triumphs, their losses and loves, we can find a shared sense of humanity that bridges the centuries. So as you drift off to sleep, let your dreams wander to the timeless rhythm of a Viking woman's life, the soft clack of a loom, the guttering of a hearth fire, the distant crash of waves against a dragon-proud prow. Hers is a legacy that deserves to be remembered and celebrated. And with that, we come to the end of our time together. I hope this whirlwind tour through the lives of Viking women has been an informative and relaxing experience. If you enjoyed drifting off with a bit of boring history, I encourage you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are plenty more soothing tales of yesteryear to come. But for now, I bid you a fond good night. May your dreams be as bold and your luck as bountiful as a Viking woman's earlog. Sleep well.